Hello. Hello, police. Yeah, what's the problem, sir? We just drove down our farm track. Yeah. Go and feed our pheasants. We come across a Range Rover with 3 people in it. Yeah. It appears that they're dead. I don't know what's happening. Blood in the motor all over them.
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case, or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. And in this video, we're going to take a look at a newspaper article that I found from the 1960s, which covers in more detail the murder of Craig Rolfe's father, Brian, back in the 1960s. This was at the hands of a man by the name of John Kennedy, who went on to serve life in prison. What I believe you'll find interesting about this particular article compared to other ones that I've read out regarding the death of Craig Rolfe's father is that this one goes into a little bit more detail regarding the court process. We hear from the prosecuting QC and also from Craig Rolfe's mum in places. Anyway, let's now continue with the following newspaper article. The following newspaper article comes from the 20th of March 1969 with the headline, Murder Trial for Lovers. A wife and her lover murdered the woman's husband and disposed of the body to make it look as though he had been waylaid and robbed on the highway, the prosecution alleged at Sussex Court on Monday. Mr. Marvin Everett, QC prosecuting, told the jury that they did this so that the two accused at the same time could get rid of the unwanted husband and acquire his money. Mrs. Lorraine Rolfe, 23, of Linford Drive, Basildon, and John Kennedy, 19, a motor fitter of Butneys, Basildon, pleaded not guilty to a joint charge of murdering Mrs. Rolfe's husband Brian, a 28-year-old market trader whose body was found in his parked van in her lay-by on the Stanford bypass at Corringham on Christmas Eve. Mrs. Rolfe also pleads not guilty to making false statements to the police with intent to impede the apprehension of Kennedy. Kennedy pleads guilty to breaking and entering Mrs. Rolfe's home on December the 23rd and stealing £597 belonging to Mr. Rolfe. Mr. Everett said it would appear that Mr. Rolfe was struck on the head with a 10-pin bowling alley skittle weighing 3.5 pounds. The death occurred in the small hours of December the 24th, 1968 in Mr. Rolfe's home. Mr. Everett alleged Kennedy hit Mr. Rolfe with the skittle, killing him. It is and will be the submission of the prosecution that these two accused had planned the death of Brian William Rolfe that night and to dispose of the body in a way that would make it look as if he had been waylaid on the public highway, assaulted and robbed so that the two accused at the same time could get rid of the unwanted husband and acquire his money. Mr. Everett prosecuting said that Mr. Rolfe, a hard-working man, left home in his van at 6:15 a.m. and would not return until late in the evening. Mr. and Mrs. Rolfe had 3 children, aged 7, 6 and 2. Mrs. Rolfe is and was at the material times again pregnant. Mr. Everett, saying Kennedy and Mrs. Rolfe were lovers, told the jury that Mr. and Mrs. Rolfe's marriage had not always been easy or a normal one. At Christmas 1967, Mrs. Rolfe and Kennedy went off together to Birmingham. But this only lasted a few weeks, and it appeared that Mrs. Rolfe returned to her husband. You may think that on the probabilities, Mr. Rolfe thought that the affair between his wife and Kennedy was over. It wasn't, as you will in due course hear. Mr. Everett said there had been trouble between Mr. Rolfe and Kennedy and that sometime last November it had erupted into violence. It appeared there was a fight and Kennedy struck or attempted to strike Mr. Rolfe over the head with a bottle. The police were told, but no action was taken, as it was thought the incident was a domestic affair. Mr. Everett said it appeared that while Mr. Rolfe was away during the day visiting markets in Kent, Kennedy spent a great deal of time at Linford Drive. And again you will probably come to the conclusion that there is no doubt that the affair continued, and Kennedy and Mrs. Rolfe remained lovers, Mr. Everett said. Mr. Everett said that on December the 3rd, Kennedy, Mrs. Rolfe and one of her children went to London and brought Christmas presents at Selfridges. When asked by a friend what her husband was going to say about all the presents, Mrs. Rolfe was alleged to have replied, "John reckons Brian won't be there." Mr. Everett said Mrs. Rolfe also asked, quote, What would I do if I found a dead body on the floor in the house? Mr. Everett read two statements said to have been made by Mrs. Rolfe. In the first, she said she and her husband had not always got on well together, and he left her for about a month around 2 years ago. When her husband found out she and Kennedy were seeing each other, Mr. Rolfe went mad and beat up and assaulted Kennedy afterwards. She and her husband made things up. The statement added that she was pregnant by her husband. The second statement she was alleged to have made said that in the middle of the night she heard a thump and woke up to see Kennedy standing beside her bed. He shouted at her to get out of bed. She said, quote, "I shot out of bed and picked the baby up, and Brian was making terrible noises. I went downstairs into the front room. I guessed what had happened, but I couldn't go upstairs and I haven't been up since." When Kennedy returned, he told her, "I have done this to prove how much I love you," or something like that. She still did not know what really happened. A statement said to have been made by Kennedy said he went to the house after deciding to take some money belonging to Mr. Rolfe. Mr. Rolfe became restless and he hit him with the 10-pin bowling skittle to knock him out. Mr. Rolfe continued to wake up and he hit him again on the head. That is when he started to panic. Kennedy's statement said he thought he would make it look as though someone had robbed Mr. Rolfe outside the front door. He started to get him dressed. It was then he realised he was not breathing. After taking the body to the lay-by, he returned to the house, collected the bedclothes and burnt them. "I didn't mean to kill him. That is all there is to it. I didn't mean to do that." Mr. Everett said that when charged, Mrs. Rolfe said, quote, "I never touched him, honest on my baby's life." Professor Francis Camp's pathologist was asked by Mr. Everett if it was easy or difficult to dress a dead body. He replied, quote, "In my experience, it is a difficult thing to do." Asked if it would be easier for one person or two to get the clothes onto a dead body, he said, "I think there is no question it is easier if you have got somebody to help." Professor Camp said he thought there had been at least 3 blows to Mr. Rolfe's head, and probably 4. Describing the wounds, he declared it had crushed his skull almost like an eggshell. Miss Christine Ann Foster of Butney's Basildon said John Kennedy had been lodging at her house. She said she was a particular friend of Mrs. Rolfe and regularly visited her home. Asked by Mr. Everett about the autumn of last year when Mrs. Rolfe told her she was expecting a baby, Miss Foster said Mrs. Rolfe told her Brian would not see the baby. If you would like to learn more about the Range Rover murders, then click on the video in front of you now. You will also see the Essex Boys playlist, which has all of the videos concerning this case in one convenient folder. Many thanks for joining me for this video. I look forward to seeing you all again for the next one. Take care. Cheers.